The War on Terror is the longest-running, most costly military campaign in American history. Fallout from the series of wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan has radiated throughout the globe in a truly international affair.
We are supported by the collective will of the world.
But if the War on Terror is a defining political event, and cinema is a major artistic medium, then we would probably expect that several important films of the last decade would center around it. This leaves us wondering, why aren't there any good War on Terror movies? As long as there have been feature films, there have been war movies. D.W. Griffith's groundbreaking, racist, 1915 spectacle, The Birth of a Nation, not only established many of the rules and conventions of modern filmmaking, it also laid the groundwork for one of cinema's most established genres, the war film. Over the last century, several war pictures have stood out as some of cinema's finest, but the tradition seems to have stalled with America's current conflict. Unlike the Vietnam War or World War II, the War on Terror has little to show in way of canonical films. Maybe the problem with modern war is how undefined it is. The 9/11 attack on the Twin Towers, like Pearl Harbor, fosters a narrative of American resilience and ability to overcome. But unlike our World War II engagements in response to Pearl Harbor, it's not so obvious who are the saviors in the War on Terror. In World War II, Americans freed insurgents in France. Now they fight them in Iraq. To understand the importance of confusion surrounding America's role in the War on Terror, it's worth bringing up theories of social narratives and how they impact the arts. In 1979, French philosopher Jean-François Lyotard expounded his theory of grand or meta-narratives. The Greek prefix meta means about or beyond. Meta-narratives are narratives about narratives, or narratives beyond narratives. This might at first sound confusing, but the concept of meta-narratives isn't all that complicated. At its simplest, a meta-narrative is an overarching story or narrative we use to describe events, particularly historical ones. For instance, a meta-narrative told about the history of the United States is usually one of increasing freedoms for its citizens. When children learn American history, they are presented with the story of human progress as democracy spread across the continent. The American Revolution, Manifest Destiny, Emancipation, Women's Suffrage. These are generally highlighted points of the American narrative, and they are usually strung together to paint a portrait of democratic progress. Lyotard's greater point was that meta-narratives were disingenuous, and that when one takes an honest look at the greater course of human history, they see more chaos and localized events that contradict the meta-narratives we use to describe them. Whether or not meta-narratives are an appropriate summary of human events, there's no denying their impact on how we look back at history, and they are particularly present when we review major wars.
Treachery and incompetence had doomed the nation.
Every war in American history has a meta-narrative describing the events of the war, the rationale, and the results. These meta-narratives play a critical role in the cinema behind those wars, where corresponding war films embody the meta-narrative of the conflict. Let's take a look at America's major wars, their meta-narratives, and the classic films centered around them. After reviewing these films, we can take a closer look at the War on Terror and why the conflict is problematic for cinema. The meta-narrative of the Civil War is an interesting one because though emancipation is a critical point, the narrative usually focuses more on the loss of the South than any victory by the North. Take the two most notable Civil War pictures, Gone with the Wind and The Birth of a Nation. Both focus on the tragedy and destruction of the South. The Civil War marks America's transition to a more inclusive nation.
That government of the people, by the people, for the people.
But when reevaluated, it's the drama of brother versus brother, or the images of burning Atlanta that stick in our collective imaginations. Whereas the Civil War at least had the abolition of slavery to show for the tremendous loss of life, World War I was a conflict dozens of times more devastating and had almost no lasting positive impact. The meta-narrative of the First World War centers on the senseless waste of war. Both sides of the conflict are generally equalized. There are no good guys or bad guys.
tell you I didn't want to kill you. Tried to keep you alive.
The good is humanity. The bad is war. Most World War I films are country agnostic. All Quiet on the Western Front takes place on the German side, while Wings, a film a few years earlier, involves an American pilot. Neither film seeks to demonize the other side. The true evil is war. In stark contrast to the ambivalence of World War I, the Second World War is a conflict of clear differences. The meta-narrative of World War II pits the good Allied powers against the evil Axis powers. Losses were great, but the cause was greater. In addition to the existential battle for the fate of the world, World War II created other minor, supplemental narratives and tropes such as homefront melodramas. Though different in nature, these films bolstered the grand narrative of the noble men at war, as the country rallied together at home to play their part in the cause. In the span of 20 years, the narrative shifted, and no longer were Americans the redeemers. Instead, American troops were imperialist aggressors. The overwhelming majority of films and literature about the Vietnam era focus on the unjustified bloodshed of the war, whether it's Apocalypse Now exploring the horror, or Platoon highlighting the senseless tragedy. Vietnam War cinema rarely has anything positive to say about the conflict. In fact, the most notable film presenting America's involvement in the war positively, the panned John Wayne vehicle, The Green Berets, serves as an example of just how wrong things can go when filmmakers are out of touch with cultural meta-narratives. The Cold War is a unique war. Besides proxy conflicts, the war passed without a direct shot fired between the primary belligerents. More than a war of militaries, the conflict was one of ideas. The war wasn't about bullets fired, but a bomb that could go off at any moment. Naturally, a unique war led to unique films. While many focused on the horror of mutual annihilation, one film embodies the absurdity of the conflict above all. Dr. Strangelove is the seminal picture of the era. Not only did it understand the narrative behind the war, it also recognized the best way to capture that narrative was through satire.
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
That leaves us with The War on Terror. For almost 2 decades, the conflict has continued, and cinema has little to show for it. Hurt Locker won the Academy Award for Best Picture, but it's more of a character study than a look at the war. Besides, no one is running to call it a classic. There's the Kurdish picture, Turtles Can Fly. It's a deeply moving look at post-Saddam Iraq, but the film is hardly known, and it will likely never reach a large enough audience to make a lasting impact. And then there's Team America, the now cult classic that took the root of Dr. Strangelove, turning the War on Terror into a farce.
Oh, durka durka durka.
But it remains to be seen whether or not the War on Terror is a conflict to be defined by satire. This is the core problem with cinema concerning the War on Terror. It's hard to know what kind of film will live on since there is no clear meta-narrative. The culture has no story to understand the conflict by. Why? Maybe we just need more time. After all, the war is ongoing with no end in sight.
Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda, but it does not end there. It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated.
Yet even still, every major war had a major film released well before the 2 decades that have passed with the War on Terror. Maybe it's the nature of the war. Forming a narrative is difficult when the particulars of the story are undefined. Who are the enemies in the War on Terror? What are the reasons for the engagement? What is each side trying to accomplish? There's not even a name for the group of conflicts. Sure, we can use War on Terror, but that fails to capture how localized the conflicts of Afghanistan, Syria, and Iraq are. There's overlapping factions and military engagements in one country that spill over to the other. Allies quickly become enemies. Military objectives change as quickly as the sands of the Middle East shift. But if ambiguity and uncertainty are defining aspects of the conflict, wouldn't that be enough of a base to build a narrative on? Evading a meta-narrative could be a fool's errand. The very attempt at not having a narrative develops a narrative about not having a clear narrative. Grand narratives are hard to escape. At the end of the day, we are storytelling creatures. From the caves to the cinema, Narratives are a fundamental part of how we come to describe our world and the events that take place in it. This all brings us back to that question. Why aren't there any good war on terror movies? There's no clear response, but whatever the answer, it likely says more about modern cinema's ability to capture the cultural narrative than it does the war on terror. The Korean War is one that doesn't get a lot of mention. At the beginning of this conflict, television was challenging cinema's dominance, and the tides were turning. No surprise, the hit film turned television serial, MASH, would best explore the meta-narratives of its time.